Okay, sorry about that. We're having technical challenges. So today's topic is titled Soil Health and Fertilizer Efficiency, Lessons from EDI. So we have a number of speakers in the session today. So before we begin the session, would want to set a few groundbreaking reminders. So first and foremost is that the session is being recorded, and then we are all required to mute our microphones and only speak when we have something to speak. So if we have any questions, we can quickly put them in the Q&A chat box. And then I will also have a question and answer session after the discussions. So we encourage everybody to be actively engaged in the session. And then please feel free to share your thoughts and ask your questions. So just to give us a brief background about EDI. So EDI is the Southern Africa Accelerated Innovation Delivery Initiative, a rapid delivery hub which is operating in 5 countries in Africa. So it's in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Malawi, Tanzania, and Zambia, which is supporting smallholder farmers by improving access to technologies which enhance productivity, resilience, and also their livelihoods. So the main focus is to address food insecurity by accelerating access to proven agricultural innovations. So our very first speaker for today's session is Mazivita. So he's going to start on this discussion on soil health. So Mazivita is an associate scientist and a cropping systems agronomist. So I'll quickly hand over the floor to him since we've spent some time with technicalities. So Mazivita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aurelia. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can. Please start.
Okay. Can you see the slides okay in the proper way?
Yes, they are okay.
Okay. All right. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on from where you are joining us from. It is my pleasure today to be talking to you about experiences and lessons from Accelerated Innovation Delivery Initiative. Looking specifically on soil health and fertilizer use efficiency. My name is Mazivita Chiduwa. I'm a cropping systems agronomist, and I have been coordinating EDI in Malawi for the past 2.5 years, and we will be concluding at the end of 2025. So I am going to talk to you about, I'm going to give you a brief introduction, and then I will go into 2 categories of activities, starting with the deployment of proven technologies that are going to be organized by country. And then I will talk a little bit as well about research activities that we implemented for the purpose of generating new insights that can help us to guide future activities. And then I will include my talk. So by way of introduction, I think we all are quite familiar with the perfect storm that is currently happening in Southern Africa. I think for a long time, we have talked about the degraded soils. You can see the picture on the right there. You see the gentleman who's standing in the field. It is as if he's actually growing maize on the beach because of the sandy nature of that soil and such a low content of organic matter. It's very difficult to make a livelihood through that, but for some farmers, that is all that they have. At the same time, the farmers are quite poor. They're not able to access the inputs that would help them to at least make some changes, or at least they don't know the appropriate inputs that they should be using. And so they need the appropriate advice. At the same time, there's also been a lot of, I would say, extremes in weather. And this has been in the time of ADI, from 2022 to 2024, just the short 3-year period, the first season, we experienced incessant rains in Malawi, which led to soybean rust and an unprecedented level of soybean rust, which was a big challenge for the smallholder farmers, a big challenge to the entire industry. And in the wake of that, the very next year, we had an El Nino that was sweeping across the entire region, making it even more difficult again for farmers to produce their crop. At the same time, then there was the global shock from the Russia-Ukraine war, which meant that fertilizers became very expensive, and along with that, food also became very expensive. And so it was critical for there to be a response mechanism for smallholder farmers to be able to cope with these challenges. And so this is the reason why ADI was designed basically to have a bundling approach, because no one solution was going to solve all these multiple challenges that the farmers have, of course, with the background already. The seed systems pillar was looking at stress-tolerant varieties being delivered to the farmers, along with demand creation and awareness raising, helping to strengthen the supply chains. This was supported by the rapid deployment of agricultural advisories, and these advisories were looking at the entire production chain, from the preparation of the land all the way to post-harvest management, using different approaches. At the same time, we also had the pillar on gender equity and social inclusion, because of course we cannot leave any farmer behind, whether they be female, whether they be old, whether they be youth. They have unique challenges. And so we have to be aware of those contexts, so that as we deliver our advisories, as we deliver the seed system strengthening approaches, we also tailor them to these specific ones. And today, of course, I'm talking specifically about the soil health and fertilizer use efficiency pillar. But I would like just for us to have in the back of our minds that this is part of a bundled approach, and not only soil health and fertilizer use being spoken of in a vacuum, so to speak. So this rapid response was multi-country and multi-stakeholder, also looking at multiple sectors, because of course every one of the different partners brings their specific advantages. So we had partners from the private sector, partners from the CGIAR, including partners such as the Alliance Biodiversity of CIMMYT, specifically the PABRA activity. We also had ICRISAT along. We had government departments as well as NGOs, so local NGOs as well as international NGOs. And in the initial or the first approach to strengthening soil health, this was the deployment of proven strategies to drive impact. And I think it's important for us perhaps to define soil health to begin. And we understand that soil health by definition is talking about the state of the soil with respect to its meeting the ecosystem functions that are specific to what it is required for in that specific context. And so we deployed proven technologies that we know to minimize soil disturbance, to maximize soil cover, as well as enhancing plant diversity. And what these do is that they promote organic carbon, they reduce evaporation, they enhance the soil's capacity to hold water, to hold nutrients, and also to be buffered against things like pH and climate change as well. We maximize biodiversity, specifically looking at the legume seed systems by improving the range and the quality of the seed that farmers could access. This improves viability. You can see the lady on the right there. She is looking well and healthy because she's consuming a balanced diet. She's consuming food that is rich in proteins, and she has quite a lot of a biomass on that field. And because she has that much biomass, then you can expect this is also feeding the health of her soils. And we also look at the enhanced range of crops that I've already alluded to. And when we think about inoculation, which is one of the technologies that we were promoting, that is also enhancing the biodiversity of the soils. So promoting specifically the biological dimension of soil health. And we made sure as well that our farmers got information and advice on the appropriate plant spacing and planting dates, which are critical agronomy pillars to ensure that a farmer can make the best use of their soil health. And of course, most people, when they hear about soil health, they think about the chemical aspect, but there's more to it. But of course, we also looked at that chemical aspect, the inorganic fertilizers. And of course, we were looking at that along with the organic manures that you will hear more about today. And this, of course, brings about integrated soil fertility management. When you bring together the inorganics, the organics, and everything else that comes to enhance soil health. Soil testing is one of the challenges that is facing farmers in this region, that is Southern Africa. And so we were also looking at alternative approaches. We know that the centralized soil testing laboratories are available in the countries, but they're expensive, they are far from the farmers. And so we were looking at what are the alternatives, but at the same time, we are not replacing them. We just want to complement them. We are still promoting them because it is the gold standard to have the wet chemistry soil testing methodologies. In Malawi, Tanzania, and Zambia, we reached more than 300,000 farmers through media, through demos, through trainings, using a range of methods, basically. And we have on the screen there being a list of the a list of the partners that we were working with, specifically on soil health. I will not go into the list, but you can see it. We had a larger ecosystem of partners when we're thinking beyond soil health, as I talked about other different pillars of ADI. But with respect to soil health, these are the partners that we worked with. In Malawi, we deployed more than 100 mega demos. And what a mega demo is a farm platform where you demonstrate multiple technologies that can include conservation agriculture, use of manures, different different crop varieties. And the baby demos, which were 15,000, more than 15,000 in number, and across the expanse of Malawi, from northern region, central and southern, the baby demos only have a selection of some of these. So in some, you may find the pigeon pea maize strip crops because that is what farmers in that region have found most interesting. In some, you find a different range. And that picture that you see there is actually showing a maize, a dish with maize that has been harvested from a conservation agriculture field that has been implementing conservation agriculture in one of our long-term trials for 15 years. So some of these technologies take time to reap harvests, but we certainly want to make that clear to the farmers that it takes time, but it's certainly worth it, because the neighbor of this, which is on conventional farming, has much less, and in some, it is actually a complete fail. We also reached more than 8,000 farmers through coaching or soil clinics where soils were tested and farmers were informed about inorganic fertilizer use. Not just any fertilizer is as good as the next. There are appropriate blends that some of our partners, in particular FSU Meridian, they have fertilizer blends that are suited to specific needs for the farmers. And of course, lime as well was part of those recommendations so that farmers can deal with the soil pH that sometimes is actually holding even the chemical fertility. While the nutrition may be available or is there in the soils, the crops cannot access it if you have the wrong pH. And this one partner also implemented a microfinance opportunity where farmers could use the microfinance opportunity to obviate the challenge of not having sufficient money to buy the inputs that they need. You will hear more about the organics, where we reached more than 10,000 farmers with the chicken manure trial. I think I have said a little bit as well already that we were working with legume rhizobia inoculant. We had specifically two partners in Malawi, AISL and Mandolo Inoculant, and they together put more than 200 demos where they were showcasing the benefit of inoculating when you compare with not inoculating, and an additional 100 agro dealers across Malawi that will be able to continue to distribute inoculant even after ADI is long gone. Our partners also distributed more than 100,000 tree seedlings under agroforestry, and these were 5 tree species looking specifically at acacia, Fiderbia, and Senna species. In Tanzania, soil testing was also being implemented. This was being implemented by the International Fertilizer Development Center, along with the soil fertility testing services of the Tanzania Agriculture Research Institute, as well as the World Vegetable Center. And these activities were being done in Zanzibar as well as on the mainland, reaching more than 2,000 soil tests in the time of ADI. There was also field days implemented across all the countries, actually not only in Tanzania. And they were really going in depth into the organic fertilizers, improved seed and agrochemicals, because these are the things that can unlock in those areas where farmers don't have the appropriate advice. This is the advice that can unlock the productivity potential. We also had 234 agro-dealers accredited by the Tanzania Fertilizer Regulatory Authority after successfully completing product management training. We also had an activity called Space to Place. In fact, Space to Place is a separate activity that is led by IFDC, but related to ADI, in that it is possible for ADI to also leverage this, and some of the same partners were working on this. And through this, there was the improvement of nursery techniques, including the use of treated soils and controlled environments to improve the yields from these nurseries. And of course, by improving the yields sustainably, you also improve the profitability for the farmers. The Space to Place initiative is bringing together information that is place-based, such as the soil testing, but also the space-based information that is coming from remote sensing-based technologies. So this is also giving information about the soil layers, as you can see in that picture. It's bringing in layers of information. It's the soil layers, and also climate information, and bringing this in a way that will fine-tune the soil testing and fertilizer recommendations in a way that it's targeting to improve soil fertilizer use efficiency, and of course improve the profitability of using fertilizers. In Zambia, conservation agriculture was promoted to the farmers. There were trainings for extension, as well as demos, such as we have in that picture, showing the farmers how best to do it. We also implemented a training for, it was a joint training for Malawi and Zambia in reflectometer training. So the reflectometers are a handheld tool. If you can see what the gentleman in the picture, in the second picture, is holding in his left hand, that is a reflectometer. It is a small device that makes it possible, and it's mobile, of course, it's handheld. They can test the soil organic carbon and actually be able to get categories of soil health. It is somewhere halfway between not having anything and the gold standard that we know is the wet chemistry. This is better than the farmers not having this option. And so we are hoping to deploy this full-time in Zambia. It's already working in Malawi, but we are hoping that in Zambia we may be able to finalize our studies as well so that we can fully calibrate this. We also implemented 2 soil health radio campaigns, and similar to Malawi, we had an agroforestry activity that was also looking at nutrition, because in Zambia, we also had fruit trees as part of the distribution, so that we could look at, we could improve resilience of farmers through nutrition. And we also trialed carbon credits so that farmers can also get an income, because perhaps this can also be even more motivating for them. And we reached 13,201 farmers, distributing 300 trees per household. And with this, we will move over to the complementary approaches, whereby we were looking at the research activities. Here we had questions about what the systemic drivers are. We wanted to understand the cropping systems, the complexities in the cropping systems in a way that we can unlock new strategies and potential of, actually having complementary crops. Our farmers are focusing on maize. How do we make it even better when they complement this maize with soybean? We have a lot of information about maize, but we don't have as much information about some of the legumes, especially not at large scale. And so we were trying really to get information that can help us understand at a farm level, when we look at multiple crops and at a broad scale, how can we best unlock the potential of sustainable production for our smallholder farmers. So we actually deployed paired surveys, 2 surveys, where we were looking at 1,000 farms in Malawi, in Zambia, and Tanzania, but we have not yet had the opportunity to look at the data from Tanzania. So what I'm presenting today is only looking at Malawi and Zambia, and with those dots, you can see the areas where we implemented this survey. It so happened that the study was done in 2023-2024 agriculture season, which was an El Nino event, not by design. But what it means is that this data is quite specific to a drought year. So what we found is that on average, our farmers are only using 8% of their land to grow soybean. And of course, you can see what the implications of that is. When we ask farmers if they are rotating and they say, yes, they are rotating, but only 8% of their land is planted to soybean. Perhaps there's another 8% to another legume, but still it means that we don't have enough area under legume that is going to be used for the rotations and really to harness the benefits of legumes on the cropping systems. And we found that about 2/3 of our farmers are actually using retained seed. So in as much as the seed systems are promoting the improved seed, they still have a long way to go. We still have a lot of work to do because there are still farmers out there who are using retained seed. And remarkably, more than 90% of our farmers are not applying any fertilizer on their legume, on their soybean. And I mean, I think it's quite shocking, but at the same time, we can understand where this is coming from. Farmers think because soybean is nitrogen fixing, it fertilizes itself, but it cannot fertilize itself unless it has the right basal fertilizer. When we carried out this survey, we actually visited these 1,000 farms in each country. And we found that only about 35% of the farms had appropriate weed control. Otherwise, the rest had quite poor weed management. And when you put all those confounding factors together, we actually found that in the areas that we sampled, there was poor soybean performance. And this poor soybean performance is because even when you're using the retained seed, it is being affected by all the other challenges, such as the seed that is being used and the poor fertilization and the poor weed control as well. What we have found in other work, I have added a panel at that bottom right, is
Sorry, Mavita, you're only remaining with 3 minutes. We've gotten into the next presenter's session, so maybe just try to wrap.
Thank you. Sorry, Aurelia. Okay, let me try and speed it up. So what we found in our studies is that when you apply 40 kgs of phosphorus fertilizer, you're actually able to double your yield. Of course, this needs to be going along with the appropriate other agronomic practices. And you find that even the 0P is also performing better because it is associated with the appropriate agronomic practices. So really, it is important to do the right practices. And then when it comes to the maize, we found that purple bar. On the left, we have data from Malawi, and on the right, we have data from Zambia. The purple bar is showing you the average, and I think we all understand that the average is associated with lower and higher values. So you can imagine that there are farmers who are even achieving less than that. The line in the back, which is the black line there, is showing us 1 ton per hectare. And so there are some districts where the average was actually at about or even less than 1 ton per hectare. But the yellow bar is showing us what we call the yield frontier. The farmers who are achieving this, what is so special about them? Now we are trying to uncover what are the differences in practices that these farmers are doing that makes it possible for them to achieve this. Of course, there is quite, like I said, this was an El Nino year and the signal is very strong in Zambia, particularly some of the southern Zambia districts that we surveyed. So this is the reason why some of those are very low. But of course, we start to ask ourselves, how can we make it so that more of our farmers are achieving towards the yellow bar and not the purple bar or below the purple bar? So the climate extremes are certainly on the rise, and I think I have alluded to that sufficiently. And some of the markets that we need to enhance soil health are still emerging. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done there. And we find that a lot of knowledge is still limited in our communities when it comes to the use of organic amendments. So some of the farmers who actually have the organics are not using them, and they're not using them. And so they're actually missing out on the potential that they could have on their farms. And I think to conclude, we can see clearly that the poor agronomic practices are masking the soil health investments. So this is something that is supposed to be quite simple, but we're missing out on it because of those poor agronomic practices. What can we do to change those levers? We know that we can see that it's urgent for soil health investments to be really targeted so that farmers are not doing sort of haphazard activities, but really getting the appropriate investments in the right places. We also see that there are opportunities to improve soil health diagnostics so that we can address issues such as soil pH and soil organic carbon, such as using the reflectometers. This could make a really big difference if all the governments also come on board and make use of this, even with the national extension. And of course, we need to address the misconceptions about legume crop nutrition, because this is undercutting legume performance, and it means we're also not benefiting from the potential nitrogen fixation and things like this that we could be getting from our legumes. I guess with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention. Apologies for overspilling on the time. I hope we will still have time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazita, for those valuable insights. So we'll quickly go to the next presentation. So we're going to have Yash and Fred from One Acre Fund. So Yash Garat is the country director at One Acre Fund in Malawi, and Fred Chibwana is the field operations impact lead at One Acre Fund. So please, we are delighted to have both of you. Please, the floor is now yours. So if we have questions for Mazita, we can put them in the Q&A chat, and then we'll have a Q&A session once the next presentation is done.
Thanks, Aurelia. I just want to confirm that everybody can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen and we can hear you very well.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'll go through a few of the slides, not take too much time, so that we leave some time for questions at the end if there are any. But thanks for having us on this webinar. So my name is Yash Karat, as you earlier said. I'm the country director for One Acre Fund, and I'm joined by our impact lead Fred Chibwana, who's also on the call. So we'll talk a little bit about one component of the program that that Mazvita mentioned. So, Mazvita, thanks for giving sort of such a nice overview of the entire program. And as she mentioned, One Acre Fund was one of the partners that worked with ADI in Malawi. And we focused on specific aspects of soil health. So I'll just talk a little bit through the soil health piece. So the three things to cover today would be first, defining the why. So why did we start worrying about soil health? One Acre Fund provides inputs on loan to smallholder farmers. That includes seed, that includes fertilizer. And in the last few years, from a business or revenue perspective, so we are a social enterprise, not a true NGO. So for the business side of our social enterprise, things have been great, right? So why did we even start worrying about soil health, and why should anybody worry about soil health? The second thing that we'll explore is the how of the research that we did and the work that we started. And then finally, we'll touch quickly on a few of the solutions and experiences that we have implemented so far. So I don't think this group needs to be convinced that soil health is important, but I think it is good to look at some of the basics. So soil health is one of the main drivers of our impact and climate resilience. Whenever we look at crops and crop yields, we have to talk about soil. If we don't have good soil, we are building on a very weak foundation. And some of the metrics that we looked at globally for One Acre Fund across the 10 countries of our operation were soil organic matter, decreasing soil erosion, and reducing soil acidity. And out of this, for Malawi, our starting point has been improving soil organic matter. So one of the interesting things to always remember is that, you know, for farmers, they are aware of good soil and bad soil, but it's still kind of a vague concept, right? You do something today for benefits that you'll derive 3, 4, 5 years from now, but in our context where farmers are food insecure, a lot of the planning and investment horizons have to be shorter term, and they're doing things that they can't always see the impact of right away. And so one of the biggest challenges that we have tried to grapple with is how do we turn it into a thing that farmers see, feel, and care about? So that was one of our starting points, is thinking about how to make this a real challenge. And we'll see a little bit later how it compares with other challenges that farmers think about or perceive as big challenges. So with this big question, we started a research and campaign as One Acre Food Malawi. We were supported by a behavior change consulting firm called Appleseed, and they did a lot of in-depth qualitative work to derive some answers. So the first thing to note is, after some early research, Appleseed landed on 2 ideas that they wanted to push. So the first one was burying of maize residues while they're still green. So in the month after harvest, for us in southern or central Malawi, most of that would be in April, May, June. Once we harvest the maize, we try and bury the residue as quickly as possible. And then starting to think about making simplified compost and applying it on fields. So this is not to say that these are the best behaviors or the best or technically sound behaviors for adding organic matter, but what Appleseed was looking at is what is most likely to be adopted, what is closest or most adjacent to what farmers are already doing, and hence what is something that we can start with as a gateway habit, let's call it, as a gateway behavior change, so that yes, we start with the idea of burying residues, and as farmers start seeing the impact, we keep moving them to other more beneficial practices. So this is kind of the starting gateway practice. I won't go through all the challenges, but one of the things that they were researching as Appleseed and that I mentioned earlier is soil health is not often a visible problem, but there are other visible problems that farmers are more driven by, right? So when they talked to farmers would talk about yield loss, but the visible signs of that were pests like fall armyworm or thieves. In reality, theft of maize, yes, is a problem. But when we look at it, maybe 1, 2, 3% of farmers are affected by actual theft, whereas basically 100% of farmers are affected by poor soils. And so it was interesting to see the prioritization and the perception issue was quite difficult to grapple with, where soil health is not it doesn't invoke any fear, any emotional sort of reaction in farmers, but smaller problems often do. Another challenge that they looked at was just, the amount of work that needed to be done to do things like burying residues or composting. So farmers would often feel like this is a lot of work. I can't do it right away. Or there was this idea that, okay, once you harvest, you need a little bit of a break. And so there was no urgency to bury. But that obviously means you're losing time and you're losing some of the benefits of that practice as well. Finally, yeah, there were some other challenges to practical challenges to adoption. So farmers weren't always sure about how to make the best compost, and training was one of the only ways that they heard about compost, but sort of just hearing information when it comes to making things like compost isn't always enough, right? So there has to be more practical, more facilitative, more sort of hands-on training to go along with it. And finally, as a business, and I just included this, kept this slide to kind of keep the focus on how do we as businesses or as organizations maintain the focus on things that are not central to our business. But I think there was this idea that enrollment and repayment, which are sort of revenue-driven habits, are the bigger focus when it comes to the organization, and soil health is not. So what kind of solutions did we land on? First, we started with this big picture vision to say that we want One Acre Fund Malawi to be known as a healthy crop organization rather than just as a fertilizer supplier. So one of their messages was start from the top, make sure that you have a strong vision at the leadership level, and that you talk about it constantly with your team to make sure that they understand that this is a big picture change that we need to make. Second, we had these 4 strategic aims. So the first was, again, making soil health and soil health impact a top priority for all One Acre Fund staff. Second, we figure out how to make sure that farmers actually are emotionally driven by unproductive soil. So there's a healthy fear of poor soil. Third, we figure out how to train farmers better. So have more facilitation, have more hands-on and practical training. And then fourth, we figure out the practical steps of how to make burying residues and composting easier. So in this way, we took kind of the concept and created a strategy around it that we could now start implementing. So I'll just have a highlight on one strategic initiative. How this looked was we have some global targets around soil health that I mentioned on soil organic matter. Taking this strategy to implementation, we now talked about the embedment. How do we now start embedding soil health into One Acre Fund's everyday activities? And what this meant was we defined the vision, we defined the objectives, the vision that I mentioned in an earlier slide on what we want to do for soil health. We started making soil health part of our culture. So we had a campaign slogan, our soil, our wealth in Chichewa. We also had t-shirts. We had a couple of big events where we invited a lot of farmers to talk about soil health and celebrate composting or burying of residues. They got prizes if they participated in those activities. We also had key performance indicators that our staff were being held accountable against for things like how many farmers are composting, how many farmers are burying residues. So this was one way for us to just take an idea and really start implementing it and actioning it on the ground to make it a real thing. So one other way that we thought about this was what change will sound like and look like, right? So we wanted to define success for ourselves and for our team so that, again, they know what does it mean to take a strategy, implement it, and really reach a state where we can say, yes, we did this. So these are just example statements that we would hopefully hear from farmers as this campaign takes root. So one example would be unproductive soils and fires from field burning are the villains, and they're far worse than pests or thieves. So these are the kinds of sentiments. If we hear them from farmers, we will know, yes, we have succeeded, we've done something right. I will skip this slide just in the interest of time, but again, it also tells you about kind of what change will look like and what actions will we see from farmers to know that, yes, we have succeeded. And then just a quick glimpse at our soil health campaign. As I mentioned, we really tried to take these concepts and make sure that they had very specific KPIs attached to them, so that we knew that that we could hold ourselves and hold our staff accountable. And we then tried to frame it with these 4 Fs. So focus, fear, fun, and facilitate. So these were trying to look at some of the strategic aims, the 4 strategic aims that I mentioned in an earlier slides. These were kind of the KPIs that were related to those. And then finally, on the implementation side, Fred, maybe I'll just continue since it's one slide and we're short on time. I was going to have Fred jump in here, but I'm happy to just finish off. What have some of the implementation ideas looked like? So this is just one slide, but One, on the fear factor, we have this campaign. We had this campaign in Takayatu Chumachatu, and we created a visual for the soil health villain. So I think you saw us referring to the idea that we want farmers to feel that bad soil is a bigger problem than pests or thieves. And so we tried to create this villain that you see at the bottom here. That's our soil health monster that is kind of, eating nutrients and drying up soils and killing crops. And then on the top, you have a visual representation of what success would look like, a green goddess where you have really nice, rich soil and healthy crops. On the right-hand side, you can see how we try to improve on the ground, improve organic matter by providing or importing organic matter into farmer fields. So the way we did this was we offered a packaged chicken manure project for farmers that we bought from a local supplier in Blantyre, from a poultry manufacturer or poultry company. And we were drying it, we were packaging it, and we were selling it to farmers. So this was a way to make a practical difference to farmers' availability of organic matter, which is one of the barriers that they had for not adopting compost. So these were some of this is the end of my slides. Sorry, I rushed through a little bit just to make sure we have some time for questions, but even then we only have 3 minutes. But back to you, Aurelia.
Thank you very much, Yash, for that wonderful presentation. So we'll quickly go into the Q&A session. So I've seen there's a question already in the chat box. This is from Kelvin Kalala. So I think this is addressed to Mazita. The question is, how have we supported farmers in understanding the differences and impacts of organic manures compared to inorganic fertilizers, especially in the light of the rising cost of inorganic inputs? Have we conducted any demos or trials to help them observe any differences? So Mazita, you can respond to this. Then if we have more questions, please raise your hand, then I'll unmute you.
Thank you, Calvin, for that question. Actually, what Yash was just explaining there is actually one of the examples that we can talk about that is showing farmers the benefit of using organic manures. So that example that he just spoke of right at the end of his talk, farmers were accessing chicken manure, which was organized by 1 Acre Fund. But of course, this was at a cost. But in other activities, we have mostly advised farmers to use the organic amendments that they have, such as the cow manure, and combine that with the inorganic fertilizers. I do see, oh, actually, that's Jonathan Odong. I was going to ask if we have one other partner who was working very much in the inorganic fertilizer space. We don't have any reports specifically of that, but I do believe that we certainly emphasized it in the advisories, but I'm not 100% sure if there's any beyond what 1 Acre Fund did in terms of the organics. But other partners can actually come on board and perhaps offer more insights on that.
Thank you very much, Mazita, for that. So, Kelvin, is that clear? Or do we have a follow-up question to that? Okay, so in the interest of time, there's a question from Jonathan. He wants to know if there's a more effective tool compared to a logic-based approach. And Yash has responded that the behavior change consulting team that they've had they've had a strong experience, and there's a principle from behavior change and advertising and marketing campaigns that emotional responses often are necessary for big shifts. So this is the response to the fear factor approach that Yash presented. So then there is a more emotional push required in this approach. Are there any more questions from the participants? Or maybe I should want to elaborate more on the fear factor approach.
Yeah, I mean, if there are no other questions, I'm happy to just say again that the idea here was, it is poor soil is a problem that everybody faces, but it has no name, no face. It's just sort of quietly sapping away nutrition and crop performance. So the idea was to give it a human face, or not a human, but yeah, human-like face, to make it a real thing, and to kind of use an emotional response, because that is what we as humans respond to, right? So even for marketing campaigns, advertising campaigns, not to mention a controversial example, but politics, right? A lot of politics is fear-driven and emotion-driven rather than logic-driven very often. And so I think this was just another example where they said, look, the more we use, the more we kind of give this a real face and make it a real thing, farmers will hopefully respond to it. And that's why we're trying this. We don't have data to know whether it's more effective yet. All we can say is that we have been using it. I think it has been great to see farmer engagement with this. And certainly it is helpful to make it a campaign and have this visual, because it can also be hard to just have a logical, kind of a drier scientific approach when speaking with farmers, right? So I think we wanted to have something that they could give a name to, that they could have posters about, that they could see every day. So this is what our attempt is.
Interesting. So I've seen there are a lot of other questions popping up in the chat. There's also a hand from Oswin, so I'll give Oswin the floor. So Oswin, you can ask your question, then we can go ahead and discuss the ones in the chat box. Oswin?
I think otherwise, Fred, do you want to respond to the second question that has come up about the simple tools for comparing soil health?
Hello.
Okay, so Yash, let's give Oswin the chance to ask, then we can go ahead. You can go ahead and respond to the question in the chat box. Yes, Oswin, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Yeah, my question is to Yash. He has told us that they were trying to increase organic matter content through use of chicken manure. And earlier on, he also presented on the use of compost manure. So my question is, considering that the chicken manure may have rapid mineralization of the carbon versus the compost, is it better to continue asking farmers to use chicken manure instead of organic compost? How do we compare
So I think,
in terms of
Oswin,
organic
that's a great question, Osman. Thank you. So these were two products that the poultry company was offering us, so we tried to do both. The chicken manure is much cheaper, and the compost is a bit more expensive, because the compost, they have to use a lot of other materials as well. But both products were dried and packaged and available to farmers. On the chicken manure side, we were actually not encouraging farmers to apply it directly into the soil. The idea was, one of the barriers to making compost that farmers mentioned is a lack of kind of rich organic material to start with. So the strong perception was, to make good compost, you need something like a manure from an animal source, basically. And so our idea was, okay, we introduced packaged chicken manure. The company is packing it in 35 kg bags. And so we could sell 1 or 2 bags per farmer, and then they actually put it in their compost heaps or compost pits and make compost, so that stabilizes the nutrients as well in the chicken manure, and then they apply it to the soil. And for that reason, our current model is actually to provide chicken manure 1 to 2 to 3 months before the planting, before we actually go and plant, so that farmers have time to mix it with their locally available organic materials, turn it into a little bit more of a compost type thing, and then they apply it on their soils. So that is what we did, in fact, to kind of try and get around the problem that you're mentioning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Should I respond on the other question?
Yeah, Fred, go ahead.
Yeah. So on the, like, did we develop any simple tools for comparing soil health? So basically in our trainings, we do train farmers on like simple things on how to compare their soils, especially around visuals. So, you know, the darker the soil, the better it is. So we've been training them on like special like sort of strips of colors on how their soil changes as one simple thing that they could tell that their soils are changing with this with either applying compost or either the burying of residues. So as you on that strip, as their soils are getting darker, for example, then maybe they're getting healthier, and also like comparing with other fields on where they stand in terms of like organic matter. I think we've seen in most cases, like farmers say, for example, my soil is, you know, light brown color, so I need to apply more. So in that case, they would apply maybe 2 handfuls of chicken manure, 2 handfuls of compost. Whereas maybe for those that feel like it's still, you know, not as dark, but, you know, a little bit darker brown color, then they would apply maybe 1 handful of compost or chicken manure. So I think the visual part is one simple tool where farmers can track it, and they can also track it over time. So from this season to next season, that sort of change in color is that specific thing where that simple thing where they can actually tell if their soils are making progress. I hope that answers it.
Does that answer the question? Okay, so there is another question in the chat box, and I think this is directed to Mazita. So do you think the 300 agroforestry seedlings per household is on a higher side, considering the limited land holding size in Zambia of between 2 to 3 hectares and competing needs for land use, such as crop production and livestock rearing, thus the opportunity cost? Mazita, this is addressed to you.
Thank you, Aurelia. Well, 300 seedlings may be on the higher side, but it all depends on, you know, different farmers. And you also want to think about perhaps thinking beyond the farm, but also going into the landscape, because the benefits of the landscape are also going to come onto the farm. And so 300 is what is available for the farmer, but where a farmer doesn't see that it is possible for them to actually plant the 300 plants, then they can just accept less. And of course, there is also the possibility that some of those trees will not make it. But in our studies, we found that the Zambia farmers have larger land when you compare with the Malawi farmers, for example. So it does, again, come down to the specific context. It comes to the specific farmer. For some farmers, 300 is okay. And some of them don't have to necessarily be competing with productive land, because like I mentioned, some of it is actually fruit trees. And these fruit trees are not necessarily just for home consumption, but the farmers can also sell that. So in the cases of the farmers that have larger land areas, they can actually use some of that as well for subsistence as well as commercial enterprises.
Thank you so much for that response. Do we have more questions or follow-up questions on that? Seems the session was very insightful and very clear as we have no more questions. So we've reached the end of today's session, and I would like to thank the presenters for having done a wonderful job today. We thank Yash, who I think he's rushed to another meeting. Also thank Fred and Mazita for today's session. So on behalf of the ADI team in Zambia, I would like to say that we're championing soil health here, and we are looking forward to more efficient use of fertilizers. So thank you so much, and stay tuned to the next webinar. Have a good day.
Thank you, Aurelia. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Right, thanks.